All great art. It adds up to more than the sum of its parts.
Huh? How can art, or anything at all, add up to more than the sum of its parts? What do they mean by that? Well, if you pause this video to genuinely consider that question, I applaud you. You're the one student out of 100,000 who interrupts a lecture to ask the teacher to prove what they're saying is actually true. Or the type of reader who doesn't simply underline unfamiliar words. You stop right then and there, look them up, and pursue their meaning. Skepticism, or perhaps some whimsical curiosity, has drawn us to the same place. You and I are not so different in that regard, because that very same skepticism has also led me to mull over: what is narrative design? Why is narrative design? How to narrative design? Over the past several years, I've heard plenty of definitions, yet seldom are they paired with actionable steps that make those answers any useful. Think of this folly like teaching. Would your students really learn anything if you simply gave them all the answers? Of course not,
Why?
because an answer only holds value within the specific context of its respective problem. Hurl new challenges at them, and, without any critical thinking, they're likely to crumble. If true, then, what matters most are the tools, the process behind those answers, the means to naturally identify and apply critical thinking across several instances. Teaching someone how to fish is more valuable than just one fish, because the skill could yield infinitely more fishies, infinitely more answers. Perhaps empirical, but on my own journey, I've found very few comprehensive resources on narrative design, and I can only speculate whether or not that's due to some degree of gatekeeping. Obviously, the creative industries are extremely competitive, saturated, and in a vacuum, vapid even. Yet, and I argue this respectfully, very few roles, as in livelihoods, exist as scarcely as that of a full time narrative designer. If you agree, then it makes sense why insiders might try to limit their competition. Or who knows, maybe just no one definitively knows. Nonetheless, in doing so, I believe a much larger problem arises. Specifically, what I'm alluding to is the obfuscation of narrative design's absolute value. Watcher, this is directed at you. Imagine you're directing a game. Let's be pragmatic. Your budget is limited. Think of the checklist off the top of your head. You probably go, well, I'll need a programmer for code, an artist for visuals, an animator for some movement, and if we're lucky, a writer to develop some source material. Maybe, just maybe, the high up executive that you are has heard of this so called narrative designer. Yet you think, for what exactly? For what? Narrative design. What value does that get me? Watcher, what do you honestly think that value is, if any? I feel, as of today, there is no unanimous answer. I see industry veterans themselves say no two narrative design jobs are the same. Now, should there be a single absolute? No, and there never will be. But conversely, reality is the disciplines in highest demand tend to have clear, tangible outputs, or at least some industry perception or standard. Creatives dislike being lumped together as if they aren't idiosyncratic or unique. But in terms of livelihood, when someone has a problem, it means almost everything to be known as the immediate solution.
The music is all consuming, I want to tell you. It's tyrannical. Now, we found out some time ago that if you take a whole group of really super bad dudes and hang them in together, they'll make some music whether or not somebody else thought it was hip or not, you know. It'd be okay. You dig? Somebody's got to start it.
To save them from themselves.
With all that being said, would it be unreasonable of me to argue that if more people were aware of what narrative design actually is, that there might be more demand for the discipline? Right now, I believe the absence of some standard intrinsically not only devalues the craft itself, but makes long term sustainability difficult to foresee. If entry level does not exist, if aspiring developers must simply guess which version of narrative design a particular business is seeking, then how can they honestly label themselves as competent when the definition of competence varies so drastically? Narrative design is a rather nascent field, but they only have been existing for a couple decades at best. So many of the people who started the movement are still around. Yet what happens when they're all gone? Will it all just vanish? As I've said, in my eyes, narrative design, the craft itself, its value, its true meaning, is still largely unknown. That's why I'm framing this introduction as I am. This was a preemptive attempt to give form and weight to a seemingly arcane procession, to raise awareness for the sake of progression, to tear down and reveal the all-important questions. If you decide to join in on this conversation, I implore you not to simply accept what I say as truth, but rather to doubt it, challenge it, and measure it against your own point of view, because that is the art of conversation.
A human process where perspectives clash, where red-hot passion collides, where conflict becomes movement and reactions become our truth.